Hello, hello. Hi, Paul. It's so nice to be with you today. Thanks for making the time to have a chat.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation. Really pleased to be here.
So, Paul, for the audience, give us some context in terms of kind of a little bit about your career story, who you are, and how did you come about doing the P&L stuff that you're doing today, which is not what people think it stands for.
Sure. I mean, I've had a quite a diverse career. Started off as a musician and then went into sort of marketing communications, and I spent about 30 years in marcoms and reputation management, brand strategy, and so on. Mainly running my own agencies and then also working for others at senior levels on occasion. And around 5 or 6 years ago, when I had one of my agencies, we were, I guess, subjected to a very challenging series of unethical actions that took the agency and me to my knees at the time. And it was at that time, being a creative at heart, I came up with the idea of the new P&L, and the new P&L is principles and leadership, not just profit and loss. And that idea just sort of stuck around with me for around 5 years, and I would continually revisit it and try to find a home for it, if you like, for the idea, because I believed there was resonance to that idea. And around 18 months ago, the idea of the new P&L and the idea of a podcast came to merge somewhere in the dusty back blocks of my brain. So I dipped my toe in the water with a podcast and the new P&L, and it just seemed to resonate and take off with audiences. And we've grown quite exponentially over the last 18 months to the point where the beginning of last year, I launched the new P&L Brand Purpose Institute. And that's really working with businesses to redefine and redesign the principles and purpose that underpin their business, and then realign it with the commercial ambitions.
And tell us a little, what does the new P&L stand for?
Well, the new P&L stands for principles and leadership, and that's because we believe in the new economy, in the modern economy, it can't just be about profit and loss. It's got to be about more moral leadership, more empathetic leadership, and a focus on the essence of what business should be, and that is the purpose and the principles that underpin it. So the new P&L is principles and leadership.
And you know what, as you're talking about this in terms of just that purpose, yes, as an organization, but also as you see, the new generations coming in, they care more about their own purpose as well. So I would imagine,
Yes.
It's also aligning those individual values with the company values. And when you have a generation of future employees that are coming up that are really looking for that, I would imagine that speaks very closely to them. I mean, looking back, would you want to work for a company that has that purpose and has that responsibility versus somebody who's just kind of there to make the money, right? Have you seen?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have traditionally gone to the job, haven't we? We've applied for a role, we've seen a role advertised in whatever shape or form, and we've applied for the job. A business that identifies and creates an amplification around its purpose means that the next generation that's coming into that business can not just identify with their synergy with the role, but that they can recognize their synergy with the purpose of the organization itself. And if you have a collection of employees who align with that purpose and who believe in it, and they see some synchronicity with their own purpose in life, then you've got more productive employees, more loyal employees, employees that believe in the vision and the future of that business because it's in synergy with them.
Hey you, thanks for watching. If you're enjoying this episode, make sure to share it with friends and family who might find it interesting. Make sure to hit the subscribe button as well to stay up to date on weekly new videos that are going to be coming out with some awesome guests that I bring on. And if you have any questions, use the comment section to ask me questions, to interact. I look forward to talking to you. Absolutely. And I think that's what I'm hoping, at least I'm seeing some trends of companies that's starting to realize that if we're able to align this individual purpose and to really give people something that they can relate to, that they are going to be more productive. And on top of that, when you are feeling like you're contributing to something you care about and you genuinely believe in, your well-being is probably impacted in a positive way as well. In your case, I know you do quite a bit about energy management as well, if I'm not mistaken. So you focus a little bit about how do we, actually get focused in a world where we're continuously distracting, and it really comes down to managing that energy. Is that part of some things that you're doing within the P&L?
It is. I mean, we do a lot of work, a lot of workshops around leadership and leadership development. And a key component of that is that sort of super presence as a leader. So we focus mainly on super presence from a curiosity and a creativity perspective. So how we remain curious in that moment, how we develop our creativity, how we stay in that moment as leaders, because I think we're always looking forward as entrepreneurs or business owners or business leaders, but so often we're chasing the future, but we're not focusing ourselves in the present. And the more we can stay in the present and focus on the task at hand, then actually, perhaps conversely or counterintuitively, the more we're able to develop the future, because we're able to focus in that moment on that thing we're focusing on. And whatever we're developing in that moment enables us to develop the vision for the future. So in terms of curiosity, we do a lot of workshops around developing curiosity, developing creativity, understanding the mechanisms that you need to build within yourself to maintain that curiosity. And curiosity is the heart of creativity. Creativity is the heart of innovation. So the more curious you are, and the more curious you are in that moment, and the more you curate your curiosity and develop your creativity, the more innovative your business is going to be.
And just to touch base on innovation and creativity, I'm curious because you started your career as a musician and then you went into the marketing space. So I want to talk a little bit about how that has helped you. So having that kind of the talent and the skills of a musician, has that helped you with your, business initiatives that you're doing?
Absolutely, because I think the worst thing you can ever do with creativity or innovation or whatever creative thinking you do in business is to think that creativity is only going to come from the business or the industry that you're in. The best way to join those dots, to burn those passages in your mind, is to take creativity from all forms, from business, from music, from poetry, from what you see in the street, and curate all that curiosity and that creativity. Because the more you have in the mind, the more the mind is able to join dots in new ways between seemingly abstract and unrelated elements. But you can see something in business and you think, well, what's a creative solution to that? And I'm always amazed, even for myself, where some of the creative solutions come from, because it could be from music, or it could be the process you use to write, or from another industry that you think is unrelated to the solution that you're trying to create in your own industry. So creativity shouldn't be boxed up. You should embrace creativity of all formats and all forms, from all industries and all ways of life, because all of that feeds into the rich tapestry that sits in the back of your brain, waiting to be joined into dots to find that creative solution to the problem at hand.
That's an excellent point. And I would imagine just by, I was just reading something about, we don't know what we don't know. And it's almost like tapping into the different parts of our brains. And of course, there's a lot of research about, the different parts of our brains that light up when we're doing certain activities and exercises. And by kind of, engaging in activities we normally would engage in my case, I'm not an artistic person from a pure arts perspective of music. Right. But I do try to make an effort to go to these things, and I have no idea what's going on. I don't know how I'm supposed to be looking at art, or I might not have the appreciation for the music and the art as artists and musicians do. But I think just being in that environment and talking to these individuals helps you see things from their perspective, which I'm sure strengthens our just brains, the way we operate in general, because then it's just like igniting all these different things. And like you said, at the end of the day, it's just, sometimes we come up with ideas, we're not sure where those coming from, but they are coming from those experiences and exposures that might not be tangible in that very moment, but add up, as you said.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things we teach in some of the workshops we have is that there's no such thing as a bad idea. There is only maybe not the right idea for right now. So an example I give in the workshop is we go into a brainstorm in a business, and we may have half a dozen people sitting around that table. And we've got a challenge or an opportunity that we want to address in that workshop. And between that 10 or 15 people, we come up with 30 ideas, let's say, in that room. We put them all up on the Post-it notes. And that team decides on one or two ideas that they want to take forward. So they walk out of that boardroom and they leave 28 ideas sitting there that may be not right for right now, but may be right for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, when The opportunity changes when the context changes, when new people come into the business with fresh eyes. So the best thing we can ever do with creativity is curate, is collect those ideas and revisit them continually. When I had the idea for the new P&L, I could have thought in that moment, oh, that's a great idea. Maybe I'll revisit that at some point, and never wrote it down. But I did write it down. I curated it and I kept revisiting it with new context and new thinking and as my life developed. And now I sit here doing probably what I feel is what I've always supposed to have done in life. But if I hadn't curated that idea and collected it and revisited it in that moment and joined the dots 5 years later after that idea, then I wouldn't be sitting here doing what I'm so passionate about. So we must collect all of those ideas. There's just there might not be a right time for the idea, but there's never a wrong idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It just makes me think of, like, at the end of the year, I look at kind of some journals that I write and throughout the year, and then you look back at like some of your ideas, and I always keep them in hopes. I was like, you know what, it might not be something I'm going to use today, but in that, to your point, and I always fight them. Should I just get rid of it? I'm like, no, I should keep the journals, you know. So I always go back and forth. So I'm definitely going to keep them after what you just said. I'm also curious, Paul, a little bit about yourself as an entrepreneur, because it's so, and my audience very much is either exploring entrepreneurship or some kind of career change, and essentially just overcoming this fear of taking the jump. And a lot of people ask me, like, when do you know when it's the right time to jump into, you know, a startup venture or your own business? And I'm just curious, in your case, talk to me a little bit about what inspired you. You've mentioned that it was kind of through different challenges that you said, okay, now it's time to create something like this. But what was the real, like, tipping point for you to create the new P&L?
It wasn't really a tipping point as such. I guess the tipping point, if there was one, was just somewhere, as I said, in the back of my mind, the idea for a podcast and the new P&L merged. But there isn't a right time to go into entrepreneurialism, and there isn't a point, I don't think, within entrepreneurialism where you look back and think, well, now I'm doing the right thing or I've made the right decision, because you still have that, and you may have it as well, I don't know whether you do, but the dance of the doubting every morning, where you get up and talk yourself into, you know, is this the right thing? Should I be doing this? Am I a success? Am I a failure? And all of those internal conversations, they never go, but then they are also, paradoxically, they are critical to drive the anxiety that drives the motivation. You know, you've got to, fear is a good thing, you know, and it's just how you harness fear. Fear of failure drives that success, and embracing failure helps to drive that success as well. So there isn't a right time. You've just got to dip your toe in and try something. I've had dozens of ideas, and some have worked and some haven't. 10 years ago, when I was in my early 40s, I had a midlife crisis and set up a surf clothing brand, you know, and it didn't work, but I've always surfed and I've always loved surfing and I love the idea of it. I gave it a shot. It didn't work. It was a dismal failure, but I still love the clothing. I still love the concept. I still love the idea. It might work again one day, but you don't know till you try it. It's that old cliche, isn't it? And the only thing worse than failure is to look back and think, I should have. You know, we don't want any should-haves in our lives. We want, I tried and maybe it worked or maybe it didn't. And, you know, as you said earlier, all of those things that we've tried all come together to lead us to where we are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is what you know, in some of the work that we do with Western, we work with young people, and we always say, you know, and they come to us and they'll ask us, like, you know, how do you make sure that you're making the right move, and how do I make sure that I'm entering the right space? And they're like, you can't be sure, you don't know, but you just have to try it. You just have to experiment as many things as possible. And you're right, fear is usually the one thing that stops people. And in your case, how do you deal? Because I can definitely relate from just, you know, doing your own thing, waking up and having all those doubts and really kind of, I mean, for me, there's certain things that work, but I'm curious, what works for you to overcome that fear of, or that uncertainty, the doubts? Like, what do you do? What does your daily habits look like, I guess, to help you manage the mindset?
I don't have one mechanism, because I think entrepreneurs have that weird contradiction where you believe beyond belief. So you're an eternal optimist, and also you've got this massive fear of failure at the same time. So there isn't a way of managing it, for me at least, apart from just not necessarily just this literally, but closing your eyes and running forward and thinking, well, this is going to work. This is going to work. You've got to believe. You've got to believe. You've also got to be open enough and flexible enough to continually change the path. Just because the end game is over here doesn't mean the direction is always like that. You've got to recognize when you need to change. You've got to recognize that you might change 100 times in a week, and 99 times might fail, but one will break through. So there's a lot of blind faith in it. Just because you found the right thing, and I think this is worth saying today as well for those young entrepreneurs, just because you found the right thing doesn't mean it's going to be easy. You've still got to slog every day to make it work. You've got to be persistent. You've got to be resilient. You've got to, again, believe beyond belief that this is going to work. Finding the right thing is the beginning. It's not the end of the process. And, as I say, I was 50 before I found what I was supposed to be doing. But the last 2 years, just because I found it doesn't mean it's been easy. It's been probably the hardest period of my entire entrepreneurial career. But I believe that this is going to work, and I'm just pushing forward. So it's not being unstrategic. You've got to be strategic about it as well. You've got to be agile, but sometimes you just have to close your eyes and punch forward and run forward and just ignore the voices. The only way you will defeat that fear and defeat those voices is to demonstrate the success. And the only way you will demonstrate that success is to ignore them, run forward, and prove that success.
No, that's solid advice. So when it comes to entrepreneurship, I'm curious of your opinion, and in the corporate. So I'm curious from both sides. In entrepreneurship, it's very much about, I would imagine, about building that personal brand, right? Because when you're starting your own thing, a lot of times people don't know the brand, you're starting from scratch, but people may know you as an individual. And then when we shift to corporate, then it's almost like it shifts. Then it's like nobody really knows you, but then you have a strong corporate brand. So I'm curious, what's been your experience? And because you spend a lot of time talking about branding as well, like building a brand with a purpose. So with your experience as an entrepreneur and then working in the corporates, what should come first? Or should it just stay the way it is, like, entrepreneurship, personal brand comes first? Or should you focus on building a company brand with a purpose? And on the corporate side, is there a right strategy to approach? Because that's been a big conversation lately, it seems.
You should always focus on, in my view, on your own integrity and credibility first. Because once people, whether you're working for a small brand or you've launched a small brand, and as you say, you've got to build your own brand, your own personal brand before the recognition of the company brand, or whether you're working for a corporate, it still comes back to you at the end of the day. If you're a employee or a manager or a leader of a big brand and that brand happens to be successful, that's wonderful. But at some point, they're still dealing with you. Customers are still dealing with you. And when they deal with you, it's your internal integrity and credibility that will reflect on that brand. Similarly, when you're an entrepreneur, however strong the messaging is and the purposes and the proposition is of your brand that you're trying to launch, you still have to have that personal integrity and credibility. So although I understand the difference between the two, it still comes back to the individual, because you can't hide as an individual behind a strong corporate brand. You'll be found out if you lack integrity or you lack credibility. So focus on building that knowledge base within yourself, that integrity as an individual, that credibility within the industry. It all has to come back to you at the end of the day. The brand is only as strong, however big it is. The brand is only as strong as the collection of individuals within it. And the less integrity, less credibility they have, eventually the brand will decline, however large it is. The more integrity and the more credibility they have, the more it will amplify and be buoyant.
And I see a lot of professionals kind of missing out on this point because they spend so much time just kind of building up the company brand while not necessarily focusing on a personal brand. And you can do both at the same time. And what happens, and maybe you can relate as well, when, I can definitely, something that happened to us in our case is, when we started Bestern, we both, my business partner and I were working for big brands before that. So we had kind of big names behind us. And then once you start your own company and nobody knows about, even like a majority part of your network goes away. Even if you have good personal relationships with people, they might like you, but business is business at the end of the day. So, but we were lucky to still have that network because we've invested in our personal brands. But imagine if we didn't, I don't know how quickly we would have been able to take off. So, and I see professionals making this, and people reach VP and CEO levels, and often it's just the company brand that's holding them, and they never invested. So it's almost like when that goes away, their brand goes away as well.
If you're absolutely right, and if your brand promises whatever it happens to be, and the customer comes to that brand because of that brand promise, but then they're dealing with an individual, because at the end of the day, at some point, a customer is going to deal with an individual, and you're dealing with an individual whose personal integrity or credibility or knowledge is at odds with the brand purpose, then you become the embodiment of that brand at that point, and they decide to buy off you or not, regardless of the brand. So you have to develop and focus on your own knowledge, your own integrity, your own credibility. That will reflect the brand when you're dealing with your customers.
And how often should a business rebrand? Is there a timeline of how often we should rebrand?
No, I don't think so, because there's several different types of rebrands, isn't there? There's a fundamental rebrand, and that could be as a result of new management, new acquisition, whatever it happens to be. And then there are evolutions of brands where you're continually revisiting the messaging, the way the brand is positioned, the way the brand aesthetic or logo represents itself, to modernize it or whatever the case may be. So there's no set time. It depends on what you're looking for from that brand at any given point in time, and is it reflecting the nature of that company at that point. But as part of that evolution or fundamental rebrand, you still have to drag it back to the anchor, and the anchor is purpose. And you still have to ensure that that brand and the messaging and the communication that sits around it and the value proposition and everything else still reflects the core purpose of that business. And the purpose can evolve as well. It doesn't have to be the same purpose as it was in 1930 or 1980 or the year 2000. It does evolve, but it still has to be there. There still has to be a purpose that anchors that business, a reason for being that is over and above the old P&L, profit and loss.
Do you have a company that, or maybe a couple of examples of companies to say they're doing it the right way? If you can mention, I don't know if you can, but if there's, I don't know, some company that inspire you in terms of their branding, their marketing, the purpose.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is Patagonia. Patagonia is a brand that absolutely knows its purpose, has defined its purpose, and importantly, lives its purpose.
Who was going from, $1 million of salary to 70,000, right? You said 70,000 a year. So it's, and how to do that across board. I think that alone will also help one to maintain that purpose, because no longer is it about finances. And I feel that, not that it shouldn't be, I don't want to say it shouldn't be, because business is business, we have to survive and it takes money to make money and all of that. But, I think that a lot of organizations today are so after the end goal, which is just the money, that it's almost like a short-term thinking. And that's why they're more reactive versus proactive, because they're just reacting to making the buck today versus looking at what is it that they really want to stand for, which then, maybe I'm just going to a rabbit hole now, but which then brings me back to individual purpose to the organization. Because if an organization creates a culture where it's just all about money and it's cutthroat environment, everybody's just kind of stumping over each other to earn more and more and to make money and to kind of get out, then then it's very difficult to transform that, because we know cultures in organizations are very difficult to transform. And if that's the leadership, so I love that example. I haven't heard of them, I'm going to look them up. But if the leadership of that organization, if that's what they're practicing, then I would imagine everybody else that comes on board is going to be practicing that. But otherwise, what happens is we have leaders where the pay gap is like humongous, right? And then they do nice big speeches. And like you said, we put these missions and values and purpose on the wall or on the little napkin. I've seen lately, like a little napkin to have them, but then nothing happens. You're right. And that's because action speaks louder than a piece of paper with a bunch of words on it.
Absolutely. And the point you make is a very valid one. We have to make profit in business. The misconception is that often purpose is at the expense of profit. In fact, it is the amplifier of profit, because if you have purpose, as you say, you have more loyal employees, you have those employees that believe in the business, they want to work for it, they remain more loyal to it, more productive, and so on. It's a profit amplifier, not a profit negative. It doesn't take away from it. So that's where some businesses need to change the mindset about the proposition of purpose itself, that actually it serves a fundamental foundation for the elevated profitability of that business. It doesn't detract from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think, and sometimes that means, swallowing the little pain for a short term, but long term. And I think that's where a lot of leaders are not willing to take the kind of the pain, is because, again, everybody's either very reactive or short term, short-sighted thinking versus, what is the kind of company brand that we really want to build? What's the legacy that we want to leave behind? And I mean, listen, it's not easy. It's not easy to make those decisions, but I think the sooner a company can start looking into that, the better it is, because obviously, it takes, once you've kind of created a culture and organization that thrives on purely profits, it becomes very difficult to slow down that train, because then it's just, too many things are involved. But it's never too late, of course. But yeah, so that's interesting. Another question I had, it slipped my mind now we were talking, but anyway, it will come back maybe. It slipped my mind. So when it comes to, I guess, your own work, if you had a magic wand, what would you like to see happen? Maybe just one or two things that you would like for companies to take away from this, or if you could transform people's mindset when it comes to purpose in organizations, what would that be?
I think in terms of what I'd like companies to maybe take away from this is just to take one step back, even for a half an hour or half a day, as a leader or a business owner or an entrepreneur, and take that dedicated time in that moment, as I alluded to earlier, to actually ask themselves, what is the purpose of their business? What are they trying to achieve? Because over time, no business started without a purpose. No one woke up on a Saturday morning and thought, I've got nothing better to do, I'll start a business. Every business started with a purpose to deliver a new solution, to create a new opportunity, to change the way a market or a service or whatever it happens to be works. But then over time, you end up inevitably, your purpose becomes that bottom right-hand corner of the Excel sheet. It becomes, let's get 5% more next year or 10% more next year. And that becomes the sole focus of the business. And you lose touch with why you're there and why you're trying to serve your customer and what the essence of your business is. So I would ask entrepreneurs and leaders, as I say, to just take some dedicated time, either individually with a small group of trusted people, to ask what is the purpose of their business now? What are they trying to do? What are they trying to deliver? Who are they trying to serve? And for what reason? Well, even, why do they exist? Because if you can't answer that with clarity and in some sort of concise manner, then you need to be really thinking genuinely why you exist as a business at all, above just making iterations of products and selling them. And that works for a time, but a business that isn't embedded in its purpose and isn't led by purpose eventually declines. And we can see that, we can see examples of it throughout history, and huge businesses who lose their way and then disappear altogether. Businesses you would think would never disappear because they seem too big to disappear, do disappear or do get acquired or whatever it happens to be. So take a moment now to just stand back, sit back and ask why you exist. What is your purpose now? How has it changed since you took over the reins or since you established the business? And then start working on what that purpose and vision looks like for the future of your business. And once you've done that, how do you then ensure that it is delivered every day? How do you weave it into the culture of your business? How do you quite literally breathe purpose into your business? What does it look like when someone answers the phone, when someone makes a sales call, when someone is served, when someone's in the innovation lab developing that product? How do all of these people deliver purpose in the business? How do they tie it back to the anchor? Quite a big ask probably, but just start with asking over half an hour first of all.
No, that's very good. And also I wanted to ask you, you've been talking to leaders, of course, on this topic, and I think you have a book coming out as well, where you're kind of putting all of these lessons from these leaders that you've spoken about. So give me a snapshot of what that book is about. What do we look forward to in it? It's on my list to get to pre-order it. When is it releasing? Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, we've got two coming out, and they're both coming out in Q1 and Q2 this year. So the first will come out probably March now, and the second will be in June. The first book is The First 50, it's called, and we have two podcasts. We have the new P&L Deep Discussion, where we interview business leaders, and then on a Friday, we do the new P&L To The Point, which is a 10-minute summary based on a couple of the key points that have been made from that discussion on the Wednesday. So the first 50 will be the first 50, the new P&L to the points, and all of the topics that we've discussed and what are the key learnings to come out of each of those podcasts. Then the second podcast will be, the second book will be called 100 Weeks of Wisdom, and that will be taking the first 100 interviews that we have done on the new P&L, why we selected that guest, and each chapter will be dedicated to a guest, why we selected that guest, what some of the key takeaways were from that podcast, and what some of the most interesting questions and answers from each of those podcasts as well. So both of those books come out this year, and it's really just an opportunity to give those who may not want to listen to 100 podcasts or 50 podcasts to draw out those key opportunities and those key learnings from both the interviews and the new P&L to the points.
That's awesome. No, I think that'll be very valuable. I think it's also, I was talking to somebody actually this morning, and it's always nice to hear stories and, actual stories from people that are doing some of the different things, and to hear their perspectives, because you get a lot of ideas, and it might spark something and might, again, change that perspective. And this is why I love doing podcasts, is because you get to talk to so many different people, and everybody has different perspective, and you're like, oh my God, I know nothing. And like, you question your own, you question yourself all the time. And I think that's healthy, right? And then you're like, well, what else I don't know? And then it's like, you don't know what you don't know. So it's a vicious circle of just like, I don't know if it's too much sometimes, like we should just take a moment, to just process all this information. But it's very exciting, and I love that you're doing this, and I love the new P&L, and I think it's definitely something that we need more of, and hopefully, it's going to pick up even more and more as we kind of transition in the way that we work, as new generations enter, and as we just rethink, what does it mean to run a business? What is the purpose of a business? And like you said, it doesn't have to compromise profits, if anything. And I think that's what it takes. It's just a mindset shift, that we need to look at it from a different perspective, and sometimes it's all it takes, if you think about it. So
and it takes courage in leaders. That's one of the keynotes I deliver, is why we need audacious and resilient leadership more than ever. And the audacious in that element is courageous and bold leadership, and we need that to tackle some of the challenges that you identified, to take on stakeholders who just want a quick profit or whatever it happens to be, to re-engineer a business. We need to rethink the way business will be delivered in the future, to ensure purpose is at its heart. It's more sustainable, but that takes courage. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes that is lacking in leadership. We need more courageous leadership.
Well, I think that is a great way to end this conversation. We need more courageous leadership. I very much appreciate you being here and sharing and doing the work that you're doing, and look forward to continue to follow you and staying in touch.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.